So what happened with Ed and Sarah when COVID started was, within the first few weeks, we were just like most modelers would do, where when something is happening and you don't yet know the mechanism, what is driving that, the first thing is to play with the data that is available to you to look at the shape that that data is taking. So within the first few weeks of COVID starting, Ed and I, we just met, and I think earlier on in March, when in Toronto, Canada, we were asked to work from home. So Ed and I began looking at different countries, starting with Canada, of course. We look at the case of China and South Korea at that point, and we were wondering, we just scattered the diagram, because normally before that time, before the public health intervention policies, what we call the non-pharmaceutical interventions, there were no control measures. Nobody knew anything about the characteristics of COVID-19. And so what we did was that we started asking ourselves, what are the pre-existing country characteristics that may have caused different countries to take different shape? Once we scattered the diagram and that phase, we looked at that particular phase, then we moved to the next phase of the disease when actually non-pharmaceutical intervention had been applied, and we started asking questions, which of these non-pharmaceutical interventions were more efficient or effective in bringing down this? And then once at this stage now, when we had these, and I started moving on to we started having our second wave, we now move to the question of which of the non-pharmaceutical interventions actually that were lifted actually caused this second rise, or did people really get tired? And we started looking at human behavior, bringing in human behavior into the modeling from a process-based perspective, taking into account human dynamics. People will get tired. They need incentives to be home. People will not respect social distancing. Some will. And we take that into account and want to find out, if you bring in human dynamics into the situation, what is causing the second one? And at this point now, we are at the point where we're looking into vaccines. What role is the vaccine playing? And how long will it take, given the way people are behaving here in Canada, in Ontario, in Toronto? How long will it take for us to hit the herd immunity in Canada and the whole world? So we're looking into that right now in different perspectives. I will not be able to share completely all our research, but I will come here from time to time to share the different research that we did at different phases. Today, I will start with the first phase of this research, which was looking at this point, there was nothing put in place by our government that slowed this down. What did slow this down will have been the pre-existing country characteristics. And so we play with that before we started looking at other models when the government had put in place control measures, when people have started being aware of the virus and social distancing, and when the vaccine come in. So we have a lot of research around this area and at different phases. So there's a fourth phase that I didn't add here, which is what we are looking at now, vaccine and the second strain. What about the South African strain? What about the UK strain, the mutant strain? When it comes here, what will happen? What's the dynamic? When is it gonna take over? What is the race between our vaccine rollout and the speed at which the other strain is taking over? Are we going to be able to win the race by ensuring that we hit the herd immunity before it completely take over in the province? Or what if it take over? Are we still going to have our herd immunity by fall or by September as was agreed? So those are some of the questions that we are now asking ourselves at this point. So again, I want to repeat again, our work has started with the first phase of the virus, which is basically when it come into a country and you start getting few cases, the dynamics that it will take. What is driving that particular dynamics? What are some pre-existing country characteristics that are actually driving that? That is what we did at this first phase. Once that happened and they introduced non-pharmaceutical intervention and people start social distancing, being aware of the virus, then we start asking the questions, which non-pharmaceutical interventions actually help to slow down this growth, to ensure that we do not overwhelm our hospital systems? And then we start bringing in people's behavior, the dynamics of human behavior, social dynamics. I remember reaching out to my friend Josh and we discussed about these social dynamics when you bring out human interaction. Some people are against lockdown, some people are against a lot of social distance measures. How will that play a role in driving future subsequent outbreak. Where this, I think I spoke with my friend George at this point when we were around this area. So when we took into account all of that and we're studying, we're now in the fourth phase of it, which I will come here to share with you. So I will start by discussing what we looked at in the first phase here, which is if we were plotting data for different countries. But I just want to pick two of these countries and show you. We started with Canada, just scattering the data at that point, South Korea, China, and other countries. If you look at Canada in this earlier phase, it was quite steep. If you look at Chile here, Chile went really slow before they went up here. And the question you should have asked is that, are they really good at social distancing, or are there some pre-existing country characteristics that actually help Chile not to go this fast or not to overwhelm their hospital system? Because the goal was, if we start going really fast, then we end up overwhelming our hospital systems. What is the best? If we go slowly, then we're able to take care of everyone in the hospital, and the hospital beds, the nurses will not overwhelm them, and we'll be able to handle this before we get a vaccine. So what are those pre-existing country characteristics? So we, on our own, hypothesize that demographic, social, environmental factors are associated with this initial growth of the pandemic. That was our hypothesis, because this is different across countries. But again, we did take into account the fact that if you are in a particular region, the fact that you are in Brazil, the fact that you are in Canada, the fact that you are in South Korea, have a role to play because of the country, and that the number of the time you started recording your cases from when China recorded their number 30 case equally have a role to play. So we did account for those coverage. Now once we account for all of that, we now took all those coverage and we decided to say, okay, how can we analyze this? We tried different, we pick all the coverage that you could think of when it comes to demographic, social, environmental coverage. We pick almost all what you could imagine. In the demographic variables, here I will list the ones that we had actually, after performing the variance inflation factor analysis, sure that we remove collinearity, we were left with. So these are the covered we were left with after we had a lot of them. So in demographic variable, we had population ages between 20 and 35. People were talking about young population, which I'll be referring here as youth. Total population. People said the total population have a role to play. For disease category, we look at mortality rate from lower respiratory infectious disease. How many people die from respiratory disease in a particular country? Does that have a role to play every year? So we looked into that, and we used recent data, most of the time ranging between 2010 and 2020 for those covered at the average. Mortality rate from infectious and parasitic disease. How many people in one particular location die from infectious and parasitic diseases every year? Does that have a role? Did that have something to say in the initial dynamics of COVID in that particular country? So we looked into that. Now we look at economy. Well, does income inequality have a role to play? Gini, what we call Gini index, does it have a role to play? Is the ease of doing business, does the ease of doing business in a particular country equally have a role to play? If you were in a country where it's easier to do business, does the fact that there are NGOs there that could have informed people about the dangers of the disease have a role to play? So we put this, and they were much more coverage than this, I may say, and that we eliminated them because we used variant inflation factors to ensure that there was no collinearity, and so by so doing, we eliminated some of the coverage. Environmental, we looked at temperature. A lot of work had been done there on temperature, because the initial group was between January and March. So we look at that first phase of temperature. We look at precipitation. Then we look at air pollution. Toxic environment. There were a lot of work talking about the aerosols moving on air. Does the fact that the environment is very polluted have a role to play in the initial phase of the dynamics? We look at social variables, the average use of social media to organize action. Does the fact that people in a particular country are good at using social media have a role to play with it? Is it a negative role or a positive role? because social media could be very useful at informing people, as well as could be very dangerous at spreading dis or misinformation. So we thought about that. What about countries where the government prevent people from using the internet filtering, like in North Korea? Would that play a role? What about a place where people travel to a lot? Does that play a role? Or people in a particular area traveling in and out, does that have a role to play? If you remember in New York earlier, a lot of people go to New York, and a lot of cases were really bad in New York, those earlier phases.
Did you like the content of this channel? So please subscribe to the channel. It's quite simple. You just have to hit subscribe, and you can decide which level of notification you want. You may choose all the notification, which means that everything that I do, you receive a notification on your bell here on the upper corner, or you can choose no notification. I would strongly recommend you to subscribe, even if you don't want to receive all the notifications. Just hit here, no notification, or hit the one that you like the most. It's pretty important that you subscribe to the channel so I can achieve a high number of subscribers, and people can as well understand that this channel has a nice content to offer, and YouTube will understand as well that it can make a nice divulgation of the channel. So please subscribe to the channel.